Do you know you can completely override how authentication works in Spring Security? Not just configure it, but control it fully. So in this video, we will be going to implement our own custom authentication provider used in real production system. So hi everyone, welcome back. This is our video number 18 of our Spring Security 7 series. Till now we are using the default DAO authentication provider, but today we will replace it with our own custom logic. So why a custom authentication provider? Why should you ever care? Because in real world system we need custom validation, OTP, AH, or some custom business rules, or multiple login mechanism you need to implement, or some external authentication system needs to be integrated. So the default implementation are not always enough. Before starting, I have created or duplicated the new project, which is Spring Security section 4. So all the previous code remains same. So let's start with our coding part. Let's go to our config package and create a new class, which is bank user name password authentication provider. Now what we are going to do is we are going to implement the authentication provider interface. Once you implement the authentication provider interface, you will need to implement all the methods which are coming from the authentication provider interface. Now to make this class as an bean, we will be creating a component. Okay, so here in this authentication method, what we are going to do is to pull all the logic of user details service here, and what we can do is to simply either copy and paste the same logic inside here. We can also create a bean and utilize it here. So let me just first create a bean of private panel bank user detail service. I will also be required a bean of password encoder, and also we need to annotate it as a required arc constructor. Okay, next what we are going to do, we are just extracting the username from the authentication object dot get name. Then we are going to extract the password from the same authentication object and will convert into a string. Then I'll just simply create a user details object with bank user details service, and we have already override this particular method to fetch the details from the database. And then we are going to check with password encoder if it is matching. Password encoder dot matches your given password plus the password which you have extracted from the database. Let me just import user detail, and if it is all good, I'll just return the user name password authentication token and user details dot get username password and get authorities. So either I can use this or password, both the things are same. If this fails, I'll just throw a new runtime exception, which is bad credentials exceptions, and I'll just say invalid username or password. So I think this particular thing is now completed. Now another method which we need to implement is the supports method. So your support method is basically tells the framework that what type of authentication that my custom authentication provider is going to support. So in our case, we would be returning the username password authentication token dot class dot is assignable from authentication. So now the actual implementation of our custom authentication provider is now done. Let's just test this particular thing. Let me just go to Gradle and I'll just do a Gradle clean. Let me just optimize the import and make sure your database and the Docker container database is basically running in the background, and just check for your DB viewer whether your database is accessible or not. Okay, let me just go here. Let me just do a hit. So this is the raman@example.com. This is my valid user. So yes, the authentication is getting success. These are my public APIs. Let me just hit with no auth. It is working fine. Let me just create a new user, which is Raj. Okay, so user has been created. Let me just check in the database. Okay, user has been basically created. If I again hit this, customer with email Raj already exists. Let me just copy this particular user, copy, go to any one of the secured API, paste, password. Okay, everything is working fine. Let me just again go to IntelliJ and stop this particular application and add a breakpoint here. And let me just start in debug mode. Okay, so application is now basically started. Let me just hit it again, send. Okay, so now we are inside our own custom authentication provider. Here in the authenticate method, we basically extracted the username, password from the authentication object. Now we are going to hit the database and fetch the detail from the database, and we got the object inside the user details object. This is the username, this is the password that we have extracted from the database, and the password encoder will basically match whether both the password are correct or not. If yes, then it will return the username password authentication token object, and user will now get authenticated. Here provider manager basically first calls your support method. Okay, then it basically calls your authenticate method. If I again add here and just hit send and go to here, so here you will see the first what type of authentication is getting supported is triggered here. So after that, your authenticate method will get called to do the actual authentication of the user. So this is one of the most powerful customization points in Spring Security that you need to see. We basically replace the DAO authentication provider and build our own authentication logic using the password encoder and the authentication provider. So in our upcoming videos, we are going to see how we can more customize the authentication provider and deep dive into the actual production ready features of the Spring Security. Thank you.